And so welcome to the sixth, this is the sixth week, the sixth webinar, module 6. And we'll talk a little bit about chapters 12, 13, and 14. We're not going to spend a great deal of time on the chapters about instruction, because you're all teachers and you know about instruction. And the way I see it, and I hope that the other Dr. Cavan shares this opinion. I think he probably does. We've talked about it some. Good instruction is good instruction. And if you've got good instructional practices in general, then those bleed over and are good instructional practices for students with EBD. So we're going to talk about instruction in general, and then we'll talk a little bit more specifically about some of those practices for students with emotional behavioral disorders. But if you'll look at your textbook, a lot of the things in the chapters about, specifically about strategies for instruction for students with emotional behavioral disorders are, to me, a little bit redundant when you just think about good instruction, phonics instruction for reading and, good writing instruction. There was one statement in there that was really amusing to me in chapter, which one was it? It was about writing. Did anybody else laugh if you've read that already? On page 338, about teaching procedures for writing. Avoid instructional practices that do not improve students' writing performance. Really? Okay. So avoid practices that don't work. Let's do that. I don't know that somebody actually did a research project and got that published somewhere. Too bad I didn't think of that. That's a great way to get published. Avoid practices that are ineffective. Okay, so I think that's probably very wise, sage advice, but I think most of you already know that. Because you're teachers who have had practice in the field, and hopefully you don't bang your head against the wall with practices that don't work. So we'll talk a little bit more specifically about things that do work and practices in general that you should have when working with students that have emotional behavioral disorders. And so Clark's got a few slides that are specific to that. So I'm going to turn it over to him at this moment, and he can share his screen. You want to do that, Clark?
Sure.
Dr.
Hi, Summer.
Hi, Summer.
Well, where'd it go?
And by the way, we only have one more week of webinar and one more week of work, really. That last week, there's really nothing that week of finals. So you'll finish up with us next week. Okay.
We're looking at evidence-based practices for teaching students with EBD. And what I did is Mitchell and company put in, I think it's 8 strategies that are considered to be evidence-based practices. And so we're just going to hit on those quickly. A lot of those we already know, and I'm very much a believer in what Lisa said, that good teaching is good teaching. And so some of these things that are good for kids with emotional behavior disorders are also good for other kids. He talks about maximizing academic engaged time. And I look at 2 different ways where we waste a lot of time in schools. We waste a lot of time in schools by not utilizing all of our class period. We call this working from bell to bell. You want to make sure that the kids know when they come in the classroom, this is what's going to be happening. There will be an assignment on the board, or there'll be a bell ringer in their Canvas or whatever. You want them to know when we come into class, that's not the time to start talking and goofing off and getting caught up with your friends, that's the time that we're going to go ahead and get started on that. And then we're not quitting with 10 minutes till the bell rings and, having a playtime from then on. The last school that I was actually a teacher in, the teachers were having issues because they had gone from a regular schedule to a block schedule. So now they were dealing with, 90-minute class periods instead of 45-minute class periods. Well, I fought that battle, 2 decades ago, and learned very quickly that even for high school kids, especially those with special needs, that 90 minutes is too long to pay attention to anything. So you have to look at that as 2 45 or even 3 30-minute class periods in which we're going to switch up what we're doing during those periods. So another thing that's a huge time waster is that the kids don't know the procedures and don't know the expectations in your class. So as we talked about last week, get that Harry Wong's First Days of School and make sure that your teachers that you're helping are teaching those procedures and those expectations at the beginning of the year, and then going over them every time that there's a break. Consistently reinforce those procedures and expectations, and then don't be afraid to take a break and say, hey kids, we obviously are forgotten how to do some of this stuff, so let's go over these expectations again. And by the time you've done it a few times, you can 2 or 3 minutes, and it can save you lots of wasted time in the classroom. This is actually a picture of one of my classes last year, and you can see that the kids are actively engaged, but they're working in small groups. I am not, a Beaver Cleaver teacher kind of thing where everybody's sitting in straight rows and everything has to be just so. And, I'm not like that. I want the kids to be able to be engaged. I want them to be able to work with their friends, that kind of thing, as long as they're working. So you also need to make sure you're eliminating whatever interruptions you can. You get disruptions in class a lot of times from behavior. Don't get the whole class looking at a kid that's trying to get attention right now. Let's keep working. And the best way to do that is keep the kids actively engaged, making it worth doing. I've had teachers before when I was a principal, and they would say, well, the principal's office is a lot more engaging or a lot more fun than it is in my classroom. And I'm like, well, that's on you. You need to make things in your classroom more interesting. And if you can keep them engaged, and you have that whole idea of mutually exclusive behaviors, they're engaged in academics, then they're not going to be engaged in misbehavior. And you can travel on with that. Next, ensure high rates of correct academic responding. So there are alternate ways to show understanding. You want to always have as many kids as you can responding. And this is a thing where instead of just asking one kid, it's like, hey, Summer, let me ask you a question. Well, everybody else is blacked out now because they're like, oh, I'm off the hook. He's only talking to Summer. So they're off somewhere else. And Summer's really the only one that's paying attention right now. So instead of doing that sort of thing, it's kind of like as a coach, if you ever been around a soccer coach, a good soccer coach has everybody moving all the time. A poor soccer coach has 2 lines, and there's only one person in each line moving at a time. All the rest kids are sitting there or standing there waiting for the 2 to get through doing their thing before it's their turn. And this is the same type thing. You can ask a question and say, okay, if I'm about to ask you a question, if you agree with this question, if you think you got it, give me a thumbs up. If you think I'm wrong, give me a thumbs down. If you're not sure, let's go sideways with that. So thumbs up, thumbs down, thumbs sideways. It's just a quick signal that you can do to grasp their understanding of it. Been helping a kid today with Moby Dick, so that's kind of fresh on my brain. If I'll say, okay, who's the captain of the ship that's chasing Moby Dick? If you think it's Captain Ahab, give me a thumbs up. If you think it's Ishmael, give me a thumbs up. Well, it is Captain Ahab. And then the same thing on Fist of Fire. All right, we're going to start talking about let's start talking about Tourette syndrome. All right. How many of you think that you know a whole lot about Tourette syndrome? If you think you know a whole lot, give me a 5. If you don't know anything, give me a fist. And then somewhere in the middle, 2 fingers, 3 fingers, 4 fingers. So in that way, I can kind of gauge your understanding and know how deeply we go into it. Another thing you can do is just like a multiple choice test that you're doing as a class, and everybody holds up. You can teach them the first 4 letters of the American Sign Language, A, B, C, D. It's pretty easy. You can go from there and do a multiple choice test. Then you're getting everybody's input all at one time, much quicker than having to grade a paper or anything like that. Of course, you can do a lot of these things on little whiteboards that they can mark on and hold up, that sort of thing. And then you can do movements. All right. If you think you lean more toward that the Civil War was caused by the North, and I want you to get over there on the North Wall. If you think the Civil War was more caused by the South, then get over there on the South Wall. And then you can have students actually move to different locations based on what their level of understanding is, or their level of agreement with a certain comment that you might make. Or you could even have them go to an answer choice. That's A, B, C, D. Here's the question. Who's the 14th president of the United States? If you think it's Washington, go there. If you think it's Biden, go there. If you think it's Bush, go there. And if you think it's Lincoln, go there. So there's lots of ways that you can be getting a lot of correct academic responses. So these alternate ways of showing understanding.
Can I add something to that?
Yes, please.
Last year I did that. I got some construction paper and I wrote A really big, put it in one corner, B. And so when we were doing star review, I did that with my 5th graders in my resource class, and they loved it because they would get to do the movement,
Yeah.
And then the other thing I was going to say, this is just kind of funny. When you did that fist to 5, I'd never really heard of that. And then in my mind, I was thinking A, B, C, D. So if the middle finger was a C and you're dealing with ED, it might pick C. But you were talking about 2 separate things. You were talking about fist to 5 on knowledge, how much if you know it, put a 1 up. If you put a 3. But before you explained that, in my mind, I was like, oh, so A would be like a thumb, B would be pointer. But sorry, that was just where my brain went for a minute.
And yeah, somebody's going to put up their middle finger, and you can decide if that's going to be a big deal in your class. Normally, everybody else will see them do it and like, dude, don't be stupid. Come on, we gotta get going.
Yeah.
So
and this
yeah,
time of year, it's like you just have to ignore that kind of stuff and just get through it.
Yeah. So I thought this was an interesting to maximize the amount of content covered, and certainly you want to keep moving, but there's kind of a saying in education, especially when you get to the doctorate level, that a lot of people plow 40 acres half an inch deep. It's not very, you cover a lot of territory, but you don't really get any depth in it, and you really don't get any understanding. And that can be a problem if you're trying to get through a lot of content. Certainly you want to keep moving, and you do that by maximizing your class time and all those things that we've talked about. But in an average classroom, we're not talking about special education, an average classroom, there's a span of 5 years between the highest reading level in the class and the lowest reading level in the class. I've had as much as a 2nd grade to master's level reading differential in one classroom. So obviously they're not learning at the same pace and that sort of thing. So what do we do about the slow kids while we're trying to keep the curriculum moving? Well, you can do some group work things, which you saw in the last picture. I have kids working in little groups. You can say, okay, on this, we're going to write complete sentences. And then you say, well, Jean Ann, I know you have some difficulty. I'm going over and talk to her quietly. Jean Ann, I don't expect you to write a complete sentence. You just give me the short answer. And for somebody else, you might actually need to make it a multiple choice because of their dysgraphia or something like that. At the same time, are you playing or are you working? You know, the Chromebooks that many schools now have on a one-to-one basis are great, and they're also horrible. They are playing games on them. They're doing all sorts of different things other than actually working. There is software that's out there that Fort Worth didn't have it. I'm out in Millsap today. They do have it where on the teacher's screen, you can look and see what's on every kid's screen that's in your class right now. So that would be huge. You can also block certain sites. You got a kid that's going to YouTube and watching videos, you can take off YouTube. But then in a little while, we say, okay, everybody do a research and see if you can find a picture of or a clip of Martin Luther King's speeches. And then, okay, I'll open up YouTube, they can all do it. Then did they get it? You know, you don't want to keep moving on if they didn't get it, but one of the ways that you do that is frequent checks for understanding, like we were just talking about, where they're moving, where you're getting the hand signals, where they're using the whiteboards, that sort of thing. And I'm big on lots of little quizzes rather than a test that takes up your whole class period, because then we're not covering new material. I would much rather give little quizzes. Most districts now require a certain amount of daily grades and a certain amount of test grades, where they call those, in Fort Worth, they call it your formative assessment, and then your what's the other word? Help me, Lisa. Formative or
Can't remember it either.
Summative assessment.
Summative.
Formative assessment.
Summative.
Yeah.
I kept wanting to say comprehensive, but it's not. That's, yeah, summative. Thank you. And then one-on-one opportunities. Some kids, even with all that, they're not going to get it, and then you're going to need to figure out a way to spend some one-on-one time with that kid, whether it's, you know, lunch, after school tutoring, or while the other kids are working on something different. But then you know, are they getting behind again? So look for those kinds of opportunities. Match the assignments to the student ability, discerning between could and would. Remember, we talked about the kid that says, I could do it if I would. And then the other kid said, well, I would do it if I could. It's very different. But there's a kind of a new take, at least it's fairly new to me, on the whole zone of proximal development thing. When I was young, learning about this, they talked about the zone of proximal development would be the things that the student will soon be able to do. But part of it had to do with that they couldn't do certain things until they were developmentally ready to do so. That was a very popular thought back then, that, you know, there's no way that a third grader brain wise is ready for algebra. He's just developmentally not there yet. Well, this new take is that we need to provide students the appropriate learning experiences and support them to help them realize their potential development. And they truly don't learn anything until they experience it. So once they've experienced it, then they become developmentally ready to do it. So we always need to be pushing them beyond their current development. So this is kind of an apprenticeship mode. The emphasis is on experience, and the teacher is there to facilitate the experiences. If you've had any of the QTEL training, which is big right now for English language learners, Aida Walke is I think the president of this group that started this, and it's published by and promoted by WestEd. It's out there. You can find this article that Elsa Billings and Aida Walke did. Has a lot of interesting information on this development for English language learners. And so much of it is that they learn by experience, they learn by doing, they learn that learning is a social thing. Very different than the way we used to look at it, that If you really wanted to learn something, you sit in the corner with a book. Now if you really want to learn it, you get with people who know how to do this, which interestingly is what they were doing all along to teach a trade. You would go, if you wanted to be a blacksmith, you would go and work alongside the blacksmith. But if you wanted to be an educated person, you'd get a book and, either work with your teacher or then go read the book at home and do your homework. But if you wanted to learn a trade, you did it with someone. So interesting theory, kind of looking at that zone of proximal development and different ways of interpreting it. But anybody had QTEL training? Guess not. Okay. Fort Worth's pushing it pretty hard now with their English, with their ESL teachers. And of course, everybody has to have the ESL teacher now. Teach academic content explicitly. Our kids don't catch it. A lot of kids are socially adept, will go into a room, they'll kind of read the pictures and say, oh, I see. Okay, this is how I've got to act in this particular class. But if we're going to teach content, whether it's academic content or behavioral content, we need to teach these things explicitly. Directly teach them these skills, but also teach them in context. Make sure that you teach them across settings. Make sure that you teach the relevance or the importance of it, and make connections. We teach so much in, the current trendy metaphor is silos, where you got this bit of knowledge and this bit of knowledge, but they don't cross over. For example, Napoleon, Ben Franklin, and Queen Elizabeth, which two of those were contemporaries?
Napoleon, Queen Elizabeth, and who?
Ben Franklin.
Wouldn't it have been Napoleon and Ben Franklin?
Yep, Napoleon and Ben Franklin lived at the same time. What about Christopher Columbus, Martin Luther, and Kublai Khan?
It was all three, wasn't it?
Nope.
Columbus and Martin Luther.
Yeah, Kublai Khan was actually a few hundred years before them. Attila the Hun, Alexander the Great, and Mulan.
Attila the Hun and Alexander the Great.
I'm guessing
Attila the
Mulan.
Hun.
Let
Yeah,
Jen
Attila
answer.
the Hun and Mulan actually lived in about 400, 500 AD. Alexander the Great was about 200 BC.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
So Winston Churchill, Joe Biden, George Armstrong Custer, General Custer.
Winston Churchill, who?
Joe Biden.
Joe Biden
Uh,
and General Custer.
I would hope it would be. Now I feel like this is a trick question. But one is to say Churchill and Biden,
They're in the
but
same
it's
time.
probably a trick question. It's Custer and Churchill or something.
But Custer
It-
was way before.
Go ahead.
Because
Winston
Custer died in the
Churchill
1880s.
And General Custer? No,
Yeah. That was
Yeah.
the 1880s whenever that happened. And then
not Joe
What
Biden.
is the definition of a contemporary?
just alive at the same time.
The definition of contemporary. Yeah, they lived at the same time. Actually,
Thank you.
this is a trick question because
Yeah.
Winston Churchill was born before Custer died, but he died after Biden was born. So
Yeah.
Oh, so all
Churchill
three.
was a contemporary of both of them, but Biden and Armstrong Custer were not contemporaries. So
Oh,
trick question. Anyway, we learn history in, not knowing who's who and all that. It's always cool to me because I teach a Sunday school class, and when I can make a connection between something in the Bible and then somebody that you study in history, I always think those connections are cool.
I agree.
Like the king that Daniel served was the king that was king during the movie 300. So you get interesting little things like that when you start learning them together. All right, we're scaffolding student instruction. To scaffold is to build current learning on prior learning. There's a variety of instructional techniques used to move the students progressively towards stronger understanding, ultimately greater independence in the learning process. And when you think about this metaphor of scaffolding, these are levels of temporary support that allow the students to move upward in their learning, but they offer flexibility. That stack of scaffold right there can be put around on the other side of the building tomorrow if it's needed, or we can just take them down when they're no longer needed. And that's kind of how scaffolding works. So a lot of times you look at the model of the teacher demonstrates, and then the teacher assists the students in doing it, and then the teacher gives the students time to do it on their own. So the whole idea of the lesson and then guided practice and then independent practice is a part of or an example of a type of scaffolding. It's certainly not the only one, but the whole idea is that you want to build on prior knowledge. We're usually pretty good with this in things like math, because you really need to know how to do some of those more basic things before you get to the more complicated things. But most of our others, we're not really good at that, but our kids need that scaffolding. Our kids also, if you had a picture of an EBD kid there, like the third floor scaffolding would be missing. They weren't there that week. They were in trouble. They spent most of that year in DAP, whatever, they just got holes. And so we've got to work with them to, I was telling Lisa today, I helped a kid who's doing an online thing through our DAP. And we got him through the end of Moby Dick today, and we finished his English 3. So he finished his junior year of English. Now he's got to go back and do English 2 because he failed that last year. So, you've got those kinds of things going on. Providing direct instruction. Again, our kids they're not just going to catch it. We've got to fill in those gaps. Yeah, there's all sorts of cool, trendy learning strategies out there, but sometimes you need to just sit and get. Lisa and I often joke about that because you go to all these seminars where they're trying to do all these late and greatest things, and Lisa's like, I just want to sit and get. I don't want to play the little games. I don't do cute. I just want to sit and get. Give me the information I need and let me get out of here. And sometimes, as boring as that sounds, sometimes that's the best way to do it. You've got to provide that direct instruction. We're trying to fill the gaps that they have. At times, there's not a more effective or more efficient way to teach than to give that direct instruction. Just show me how to do it, teach me how to do it. And that's true for academics. It's true for the procedures and the expectations. And it's also true for social skills for many of our kiddos. Monitor student progress. A good teacher is seldom surprised on test day. If you've got a kid, I was amazed at the grade that my kids would make on their end of course exam was always within 2 or 3 points of what grade they had in my class currently. So it was fun to see that you were kind of on with knowing that, but it because you're always assessing. You're always doing the informal assessments. You're always doing the fist to 5, the thumbs up, but you're also actively monitoring. You're walking around, you're looking at their papers, you're answering questions, you're asking questions. And you can tell so much by the way they answer the questions as you're doing that, and you're monitoring. Okay, I see that most of the kids didn't get this part. I need to stop right now and talk about this particular part, because obviously if the majority of kids haven't gotten it, that's not their fault. That's on me. So I need to go back and reteach this part. And if you're keeping up with it and you don't, if you've waited 6 weeks and now we're going to test it, and then I realize, oh, they didn't get something in week 2. But if you're daily looking at, are they getting it or are they not? You can be constantly making those monitoring, those adjustments based on your monitoring that you're doing. And then the ongoing active participation in academic discussions gives you lots of unquantifiable data. data was one of my, statistics really was one of my tools on earning my doctorate. So ironically, one of my favorite sayings is not everything that matters can be counted, and you can't count everything that matters. So yeah, statistics are great, but a lot of times you just got to know. You just kind of get it qualitatively rather than quantitatively.
Lies and damn lies.
Yeah. One of my Spanish speaking friends used to get me with this. He'd ask me, how many stars are there? And I would say, I don't know, mucho, and he would say cincuenta. And I'm like, no, there's more than 50 stars. Well, the word cincuenta is pronounced the same as cincuenta, which is without count. So they're, numberless. There's no end to them. Well, that's kind of how I feel about this word unquantifiable. What does that mean? That it doesn't count, or that you can't put a number to it, or whatever. But you shouldn't be surprised. You should know how well your kids are doing before you ever get to a test. So ran through those pretty quickly, but I thought those were all some pretty good strategies. And one of the things that you're really looking for, according to the law now, is evidence-based practices. All right, Lisa, back to you.
Let's just see if we have any questions or discussion.
I went
As far
to
as-
sleep.
As far as
Yeah.
instruction for students with emotional and behavioral disorders goes, I think the high points are that, a lot of these students do need social skills instruction in order to be successful in a general ed classroom. They need to know how to behave in a classroom. So sometimes that's the first thing that has to happen, is social skills instruction, how to be successful in the classroom before you even get to academics. And then some of the procedures that we need to some of the practices that we need to use in order to help them be successful. The way we group them, the way we seat them, the way we address curriculum in general, with direct instruction, making the curriculum interesting, lively. But those are the kind of things that, like Clark said, we want to use with most students. We also have to remember to address the fact that many of these students have gaps in the curriculum because have been out for one reason or another, sitting in the principal's office at AEP, suspended, all those kind of things. Got to bring that into the equation that we don't have to with a lot of other kids. So I think those are critical kinds of issues. We also have to look at when we have other disabilities that accompany our emotional behavioral problems. Sometimes we have behavioral issues that go alongside of other problems that students have. Sometimes the acting out is just a symptom, I guess, of a lack of understanding of the curriculum in general.
Yeah, it's better to be bad than dumb.
Right. And Clark has said that all semester for us, that some kids act out because they don't understand what's going on in the classroom. The curriculum may be too difficult. And those of you who are in the diagnostician program with me know that we've talked about reasons for a lack of achievement in the curriculum, maybe low IQ, maybe learning disabilities, maybe very low IQ that falls into the range of intellectual disability. So it could be an intellectual disability, it could be a gap that can be attributed to a learning disability, or it could be just that very low IQ that does not fall all the way into the area of a learning disability. Or it could be that the behavior itself is the problem, the emotional issue is the problem, and that's interfering with learning. And so, sometimes it's which came first, the chicken or the egg. But either way, we've got to address the academics. And try to get the behavior out of the way so that we can address the academics. So sometimes it's a challenge to tease out the behavior from the academic issue or the intellectual issue. As we talked about in our class on Saturday, those of you who are in the DIAG program, we talked about the fact that emotional disturbance, and now I'm not talking about behavior problems, I'm talking about diagnosed emotional disturbance, cannot coexist legally with a learning disability. You can't have a learning disability and emotional disturbance at the same time, according to the law in Texas. And so you've got to tease those two things out. That's not to say that kids who have emotional disturbance don't have learning problems going on that might be even, learning disabilities. But we've got to say that the learning disability is not caused by the emotional disturbance, that's not the primary factor that's causing the learning disability. But we all know, we've seen kids who really, really struggle academically, who have emotional issues. But we've got to be able to figure out which one is the pervasive issue that's causing the problem. And then we have to address that problem first and foremost. So we've got to, that's where our job as teachers really gets challenging, is determining which issue we've got to address first. And it's not easy. So the issue that presents itself as the most challenging, we address first. If it's emotion, if it's behavior, then you look at that one first, and then you address the academics around that, and go for that one first. That's why I think it's really critical to make sure that we get our diagnosis accurate on the front end when we start looking at what we're going to call a disability. So a lot of people will say, oh, it doesn't really matter what we call it, we just have to treat the child. Well, no, it does matter what we call it. We got to call it what it is, and get the diagnosis correct so that we can look at appropriate interventions, look at appropriate placement, all those kind of things. So questions from there? Anybody?
Are there other states that will allow someone to have a diagnosis of both ED and SLD? Or is that kind of a ubiquitous, it's either
No.
or?
That's a state, I'm sorry, that's a federal definition. I don't know
But it
how
had
other-
that weird loophole wording too.
I don't know exactly how other states treat that, Jean Ann. I don't. Frankly, I haven't done any investigation on that particularly.
Yeah. So many people, I figure someone would have,
Yeah,
it had come up somehow.
I have not addressed that one in particular.
Yeah.
As far as other states are concerned. Anybody else?
I just have one question. I just
Sure.
want to make sure. So an emotional disturbance can be added or dropped. So even though it may be the primary disability, in 2 years, the behaviors may change. The ARD meeting may come to agreement that we no longer have an emotional disturbance. But 2 years ago, that emotional disturbance was maybe competing with an LD. So it overrode the LD or dyslexia or whatever it may be. So that fell off. So we're leading with emotional disturbance. Now maybe that fell off. How?
Yeah, what you've got to do is you've got to rely on your school psychologist in these situations to make the determination as to whether or not the emotional disturbance is primary. And if it's the pervasive diagnosis, and they're the only ones that can make that diagnosis. The educational diagnostician can't do that. It's just the school psychologist. And this is what I've told the people in the diagnostician program. I've worked with so many school psychologists over the years, and they are a very peculiar lot. And they have the the professional judgment element of diagnosis in their corner. And so what happens is, and if you look at the criteria for ED, some of the wording is you have to have this characteristic over a long period of time and to a marked degree, a long period of time and to a marked degree. And that is so fuzzy. And there's 3 or 4 qualities that you can have over a long period of time and to a marked degree. Well, there's nothing that specifies what a long period of time is or what a marked degree is. And so that's left up to the individual psychologist to say, okay, I think that's a long time and I think that's a marked degree. And so I see this quality in this person and I think it's been here for a long period of time and I think it's been here to a marked degree. And I've seen the very same child in the same school district evaluated by psychologist B, who says, no, I don't think that that quality exists in this child over a long period of time or to a marked degree. And so psychologist A says yes, psychologist B says no. And so it's just subjective enough that you get varying opinions. The same is true with the autism diagnosis. It's a subjective diagnosis that has wiggle room. And there's just enough subjectivity that a psychologist can make a diagnosis that can vary from one person to another and from one day to the next. And so the tests that diagnosticians give are far less subjective. Of course, there's always some subjectivity, but not nearly as much. We have yes and no answers. We've got, criteria that are much more clear cut. And so psychologists, make a lot of judgment calls. And so a psychologist could say at this meeting, yes, this child does have an emotional disturbance and therefore they don't have a learning disability because the emotional disturbance overrides it's the primary. And so you can't say they have an LD. Now, I had a psychologist in a previous district who just argued and said, this child has an ED and an LD. And I would say, no, look right here in the law. It says you've got to decide, does the ED outweigh the LD? The LD, you have to be able to say in the exclusionary factors that the ED is not the primary reason for the child's LD. Can we say that the ED is not the primary reason? And he'd say, well, no, it's the primary reason, but he's still LD. And I said, no, I got to be able to say that that's not the case. And he'd say, well, the child is ED and LD. And I said, well, no, you've got to be able to tell me, with confidence that this one is not as strong as this, it's not the primary cause. And he couldn't tell me that, but he insisted that they were both there. And I didn't feel comfortable with that.
Couple of things on that.
Pardon?
I just want you to take a breath so I can say something.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
If the kid
Rude.
wasn't having academic problems, then we wouldn't care if he had an emotional disturbance.
Exactly.
It's causing problems in the school or it wouldn't matter.
Well, and that's part of the definition of every disability, because you have to have, every disability is two-pronged. You've got to have the presence of the disability, the criteria have to be met, and they have to have an adverse effect on educational performance. And so I try to tell this to my students on every disability. You could have the presence of the disability and not have special ed eligibility if the disability did not rise to the level of causing an adverse effect on educational performance. And there are
Like glasses,
pardon me?
like glasses,
Exactly, like needing
visually
glasses.
impaired, but with glasses, it's not
Ex-
affecting my academics.
Exactly.
Mhm.
And the same, a great example is a kid who has ADD or ADHD, and we just put them into 504, or a child with dyslexia. and they don't rise to the level of needing special education. And we give them just a general ed dyslexia program. That's a 504
Sure.
case. It's the same kind of thing. Now, I guess the difference would be it does have an adverse effect on the educational performance, but does it rise to the level of needing what's the word?
Designed instruction,
Say it again, the word
specially designed
specially
instruction.
designed instruction. That's what the law says, specially designed instruction. And that's what means special ed. That's what special ed means, specially designed instruction.
So
If the
in that
disability-
scenario where they were ED, but now they're no longer ED, but they've got the SLD, would they become more of a 504 situation?
It would depend on that level of the LD. Does
And,
the
and
LD,
that's not a rare thing. It happens as kids mature and, organically they change. The kid I've been working with is a 6th grader. He's pretty crazy right now, but I can see in a few years that he's going to mature and probably will not carry that ED label all the way through high school. If he does, it's a scary thing because he's going to be getting a lot worse. But, a lot of kids reach a level of maturity that it really doesn't fit anymore.
well, and you think about the element of ED that is, I'm sorry, the element of ED that is depression. And we can certainly medicate for depression, and people come, that they work their way out of severe depression so that they would no longer qualify as ED with depression, with medication and therapy, things like that, that would help you not have ED for depression. And so I can see that, that label changing if, with the right set of circumstances, and that ED label coming off. Does that help, Gwen?
Yes, I think y'all are amazing. I have concluded y'all are the diagnosticians. I just want the paperwork so I can. I don't know how I could wrap my head. I'm as a dyslexia teacher. I know it's brain based. I know it's genetic. So it's hard for me to wrap my head around. It comes secondary, and my students we're in a low income district. I have a lot of movers. They come in from Whitney, they go out to Cleveland, and they come into Alvarado, and they go out all the time. So if that dyslexia testing comes back positive, but they're ED, and then they move, it's going to drop off because it's not a primary disability, right? So they could go years without anybody noticing, hey, maybe it
And
just seems interesting.
This is the danger with kids, moving around like they do so often, is labels can come and go. And with the way we have LD right now, and I talk about this a lot in our DIAG class, is the way we have LD right now, where our TEA has not had I don't have a better word than balls, hasn't had the balls to call it what it is and take a stand on LD. LD varies from district to district. And so right now you can be LD in Alvarado and not be LD in Keene, and then be LD in Keene and not be LD in Burleson, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because TEA hasn't said this is what LD is in Texas. So LD varies from district to district to district. And it's a travesty because TEA hasn't had the guts to take a stand and say, here is how we as a state define it. And I think that's well, you know how I feel about it. That's how I feel about it.
Dr.
So,
Kevin,
yes,
on Saturday how I showed you that FIE of that student that they said he was both ED and SLD.
yeah.
I asked my instructional coach. She started off as a resource teacher, then she's a diag, and now she's a resource teacher, and she has a lot of experience. And she actually kind of argued with me, and she said that they can happen together. And I said, but there's that box there that you have to check that says, that the student is for sure not ED in order for them to be SLD. she said, no, they can be blended. And I was like, everything that you were telling me, she was saying, and she's super duper knowledgeable and like experienced. And so I don't know, I was confused,
Well,
but I
I
was
would,
just trying to gain more information on it.
I would differ with her. I would differ with her on that. I have never heard anybody say they can be blended.
Mhm. And what's interesting is my principal and AP called me and the other resource teacher into the office and told us not to tell any of our special ed uppers and support what's going on our campus with behaviors, with the manifestation issue. And I was like, this is so weird. There's some weird stuff going on in schools right now. I'm
Well,
just like,
that's a huge red flag when one element of your district doesn't want another element of your district to know what's going on. I mean, that's a red
I
flag.
know. I mean, they
Yeah.
made me cry. Like they were reprimanding, like
sorry.
yelling at me. And I was sitting on across from them. I'm like, am I in the Twilight Zone right now? Like, I'm
Yeah,
just
see,
informing and
sometimes-
trying to gather information. It was so weird.
Sometimes this is what happens when you start learning things. When
You want
start
Trina to
learning
go
things,
beat them up?
and when you Jean Ann is tall. She can take
I'm
anybody.
very
on.
tall. I can
If
wear
I
my
need to beat
heels.
them up, I can just ask the student that we're trying to gather information on how to do that.
Yeah.
I wear
But I
heels
don't
whenever
wanna
I
go
have upcoming
over
meetings
it.
that would be bad.
Yeah.
They help.
Yeah.
Well, I would not ever give you false information, Summer. So, and I also, I think I tend to give you information on the conservative end of the spectrum. And if a district decides to interpret it differently, that's on them. I'm gonna teach it to you in a more conservative interpretation. And so, if somebody wants to interpret it more liberally than me, then I guess that's their prerogative, but they can also answer to TEA when they get an audit and they've got those 2 boxes checked and the hammer comes down on them because they're going to have a hard time justifying it.
Well, the admin and the principal and the AP that were getting on to me, they were talking about the special ed department within my district.
Yeah,
They weren't that was 2 separate things.
yeah,
But then when I was asking the instructional coach, because she's not like a director of special education or anything like that, I kind of thought, well, I think she just is confused on it. So if I really wanted to ask someone, I could probably even go just to gather information.
yeah,
But I'm at this point, I just want to get through the rest of the school year and
yeah. I
try to
understand.
please everyone. I know that sounds
I will
but
caution
no,
you.
I think you're completely correct.
Yeah. And I'll caution you, there's no such thing as a blended LDED. That doesn't exist. And so if someone's interpreting it that way, they'll have a hard time justifying that to a TEA audit because that terminology does not exist,
Wouldn't that make them multiply disabled?
except multiple disability has a
If
whole,
it could,
that has a whole different definition when you start looking at the law.
yeah,
But that's
Didn't work.
not a thing, a blended LDED, no such thing.
Okay, I pulled up a FIE that I just read the other day,
Yeah,
and at the bottom of it, it had disability report and it had autism, ED, and speech. And so I was like, So I was reading it, and they actually only ruled in. It says, sorry, it was saying that his performance is due to autism, not due to an emotional disturbance. So they put a disability report in for ED, but they said on there that he actually did not qualify. I think
Okay.
that because a lot of times, autism and ED can kind of look alike. And so they
Right.
ruled in autism and they ruled out ED.
okay, so they put 2 eligibility reports in because they were trying to determine which one it was. And this is something else we talked about in our DIAG class, for those of you who are not in that program. You cannot have ED and AU at the same time. Those cannot coexist at the same time. Because an ED, an AU rules out an an ED and vice versa. So those are not coexistent. That's something else we talked about on Saturday. And so I have respect for that, Michelle. They are documenting, they're showing their documentation that they looked at both and they ruled one out and identified the other. So that's good. They have a paperwork trail to show what they were doing there. That's a good thing. As long as they are real clear cut which one they chose.
Yeah, they chose autism, and
Okay.
it's pretty clear on the report.
Okay.
And
that's
then I pulled up like a report in Success Ed to see if we had any ED SLD, because that got me curious, but we don't. We only have ED and OHI as the secondary condition, but that's it. It's either only ED or it's ED and OHI
okay. And that
for all
works.
of our kids.
And you can have ED and SI, and you can have ED and, you know, you can have ED and some other things, but you can't have ED and LD without a huge explanation saying that, a huge explanation saying that ED is not the primary cause of your LD. Because that's the way the wording is. That you've got to rule that out as the primary cause on your exclusionary factors. So,
Could you ever have, see, and I feel like you could have before the law changed in Texas, but could you ever have ED and dyslexia? Not now, because dyslexia falls under SLD, but before, the way they were.
yeah, you
You
could
know.
have before, even though dyslexia has always truly been an LD.
Right.
Before you sure you could have. And so now I think Tammy was talking about somebody the other day that maybe, did you talk about somebody in your program who was ED?
Yes, I have
Yeah.
2 or 3. They were like, one student was considered learning disabled plus dyslexia, but then his actions kept getting worse and worse. And now he's ED.
Okay.
But he still comes to dyslexia class and does the things like that. So we may need to look at that.
Well, what
For
they
the-
need to do is they need to drop the LD label. Now he can
Yeah.
still get services, whatever services they
Right.
think are appropriate. They just need to drop the LD label.
Yeah, they just need to drop that part.
Yeah. Okay. Any other questions tonight? Good discussion. And thank you, Dr. Clark, for guiding us tonight. You did a fine job.
Is that the end of the lecture?
Sorry.
That's the end of our lecture for tonight.
I have big questions about the
What?
assignments.
Okay,
I saw everyone's face perk up.
tell us.
What is the case study that we're doing? Like
Okay,
it said to refer to a case
Yeah,
study, but I
there's a
didn't know
case
what
study
it
on there.
was.
If you click on that assignment, the case study is there. If you go to the
Okay,
assignment
look.
itself, go to the assignments tab, and
Okay,
then
let me
go,
pull it
'cause
open.
I had a hard time finding it too. If you go to
Okay.
the assignments tab,
Okay,
and then,
It says in the case study to refer to the FBA that we did and you had said not, that the FBA was based on the student's name who I can't remember, but it wasn't the FBA.
oh,
So when
okay.
you click on case study, it says refer to your FBA for
Don't
documentation.
go to the module.
Don't
So-
go to the module. Yeah.
so,
Go to assignments.
Yeah,
They're two different
because
things.
that's totally different looking.
Yep.
Totally different looking. Because I was looking under the module and I'm like, it's a sentence.
okay, so,
Is there a link and
so
I
what-
missed it?
so what do I
Yeah.
need to take? Do I need to take something out of something to keep from confusing you?
I don't think
Well, the
so.
module assignment for the case study, if you go to module case study, when it gives directions, it says to refer to the FBA,
Okay,
which we did not do.
okay, so I need to edit that maybe.
Yeah, or copy and paste from the assignment into the module.
Okay,
Yeah, because I
And
wasn't
then-
sure where the
I thought it
FBA
was
was.
the FBA
Okay.
that we were supposed to do over a student.
did we do that or did we not do that?
So is it not an
You said not to do the FBA over the student. It was
over a student?
where you selected a student and collected anecdotal and all different documentation, and you wrote an FBA basically. You said no, that we don't do that. That was brought forward from like 2014.
Right, right. We got rid of that one.
But this
Okay.
assignment in module refers to that. So, but
Okay.
you have to go to the assignment tab to find the case study.
The assignment is in the
No,
case study is,
that one.
Rachel, you're going funky on us.
We were supposed to
Can you
not.
type it?
Yeah. Type it in the chat, Rachel, because I can't understand
Do you
you.
want me to share screen, Rachel? I happen to have it pulled up on the other screen.
Go ahead, Jean Ann.
Okay. So it's right here. So under the assignments tab. And then when you go to the case study assignment,
Yes,
it's right there. That's where the description is.
right. And it tells you all about the case study right there. Okay, now show me what Gwen was talking about. Go back to that, Jean Ann, and show me what Gwen was talking about.
So if you go to like to the modules
Yeah,
and then go in here. Whenever you come down to this one, like
Yeah.
that was all that it shows. And that's when it was like, what case study? So yeah,
Oh,
okay, do we need to get rid of that?
or maybe copy and paste what was on the other screen. So they match.
Okay, Clark, can you do that?
yeah.
Because I was looking at this and I was
Okay.
like, where is it?
Okay, I messed with that late Sunday night or I think it was late Sunday night, like late, like 2 o'clock in the morning. And I thought I had this fixed the way it needed to be. Because I also looked at that one assignment for next week. That's for next week, right? The behavior change project,
They have the same due date.
do they?
Yes,
I thought one was due this week and the other one was due next week.
they're both due May 1st,
When is that? That's Monday, isn't it?
Sunday.
The other one should be due that other big one should be due next week.
Well, let me double check.
Turn them in whenever.
Well,
Yeah, they're both May 1st.
well, that other one should be due next week. Because isn't it in module 7?
Is it in a module? On assignments, it's right next to the case study.
Well, is module 7 open yet?
Oh, it is now. I didn't see it before.
Right, look at isn't that the assignment for module 7? Isn't that the only
Yes.
assignment for
Final
module 7?
behavior change project.
Okay, Clark, change that that due date so that that's due next Sunday. Because they don't need to have 2 assignments due this week. They need to have that assignment due next week. And I think that's like the only assignment due next week. And that's like your last big assignment.
For that behavior change project,
Yeah,
so that's the one where like if we were to observe a student and do the FBA for the student, or I'm sorry, we were doing the ABC chart for like the real life kid, that's what you would want us to use that for, is this one?
yeah, I
Okay.
think so. Right? Is it Clark? Is that right?
I think they
So-
should just fire us because this is horrible.
Yeah,
I'm not going to be able to implement an intervention plan because I'm not a classroom teacher anymore.
you got 2 kids at home. Implement one with one of them.
Oh, I just beat them.
Okay, well, don't beat them.
That
this
works.
week. Don't beat them this week. Implement a plan. Okay,
Can we
I only
can we
give them-
use like our knowledge of former students that we've done this with?
yes. Yes, you
Okay.
may.
As long as you
Okay.
make it sound like it's happening right now.
Yeah, make it sound good.
In
Y'all
my
know-
mind, my traumatized mind is still happening.
Y'all know we're
Renee's here.
limping through this.
Last Tuesday, this happened. Yes.
Y'all know we're limping through this too, okay?
Okay.
I've told you all
I'm
along.
going to implement this behavior change on a coworker.
Okay,
I'm going to do the
Lisa's still
intervention
trying
plan
to
on
fix
her.
me.
yeah, I'm trying to change the
Implement it on
behavior
one of
here.
Mates. We don't need behavior.
Okay,
Actually, I kind of did, and now she's really nice.
well, that's good.
First she was mean, and now she's nice, and like she wants to go eat lunch together now. It's crazy.
Anybody have any other questions? We'll try to fix
No.
that, but if you have a question or a concern about what's on that website, you just let us know because it's probably a mistake we've made or haven't corrected. Okay,
Alright.
all right. Then we'll close it out tonight. We hope to see you next
Thank
week. for
goodness, because I
our-
was panicking. I was
Don't-
like, what do I
don't
do?
panic. Don't panic. And we'll see you next week maybe. Okay, that'll be our last one.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
All
Y'all have
right,
a good
take
week.
care. We hope little Andy gets to feeling better, Jessica. All right. All right, y'all take care.
See you
Trina?
Friday, Lisa.
See you Friday, Clark. Bye, y'all.
Just you and me.
Yep, let me stop the recording. Actually, yeah, let me stop the recording.